Wow, guys, JD Vance sat down with NBC's Kristen Welker, and not once, not twice, but three times, he made her look insane to the whole entire world. You have to check this out.
I want to start with some of the news this week. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin confirmed that North Korean troops are training in Russia and potentially bound for the war in Ukraine. The U.S. intelligence community confirmed that Russia is creating disinformation to sow doubt in the upcoming presidential election. Let me ask you this question, Senator. Do you see Russian President Vladimir Putin as an ally or an enemy?
Well, I think that he's clearly an adversary. He is a competitor, but I think that we also have to be smart about diplomacy too. Just because we don't like somebody doesn't mean that we can't occasionally engage in conversations with them. And I think it's important, if we're ever going to end the war in Ukraine, fundamentally at some level, we're going to have to engage in some sort of negotiation between Ukraine, between Russia, between our NATO allies in Europe. And that's just a necessary part. Doesn't mean we have to like it, by the way. Doesn't mean we condone the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But I think that sometimes you do have to engage in diplomacy, even with and maybe especially with your adversaries. I think the bigger problem, Kristen, if we step back for a little bit, of course, we're on the cusp, obviously, of a presidential election where I want the American people to select my running mate as the next president. Whether it's the cost of groceries, whether it's the southern border, and importantly, whether it's the chaos all over the world, I think really the theme of this election is that Kamala Harris broke things in the world, in the country.
Before this video goes on, I want you guys to know one thing. JD Vance destroyed Margaret, Kristen, and Jake Tapper all in one day. And on Friday, Trump went on Joe Rogan's podcast. That is the end to mainstream media because not only people like me, people like I don't want to say a lot of names, but people that I do YouTube with, they have their own channels. We are becoming the news because we're not biased. I mean, some stuff Trump do, some people may not agree with. Some stuff that JD Vance do, some people might not agree with, and we say it most of the time. But these mainstream media outlets, they will never ever report Kamala looking like a fool. They won't report it. Guys, we got to keep going because I need you guys to watch stuff like this and get open to the truth so you could see what JD Vance does. Check this out.
And Donald Trump will fix it. And if we get back to his steady leadership, it's not just going to mean lower grocery prices at home. It's also going to mean a much more stable and peaceful world.
When you say that he's an adversary, just to get back to the question, you're not willing to go so far as to call him an enemy.
Well, we're not in a war with him, and I don't want to be in a war with Vladimir Putin's Russia. I think that we should try to pursue avenues of peace. I'd also call China certainly a competitor, but we're not in a war with China either. I do think, though, that China constitutes the biggest threat that we have for the United States of America, and I think that we have to be serious about it. But I think we have to be careful about the language that we use in international diplomacy. We can recognize, obviously, that we have adversarial interests with Russia. We can condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and I have, and of course the president has, but we also need to engage in some smart diplomacy if we're ever going to get out of the mess that Kamala Harris has left us in and get back to a posture of peace.
And of course, Donald Trump was president for 4 years while Russia was essentially invading Crimea. Why didn't he kick him out when he had the chance? He had 4 years.
Oh, I think that's a misunderstanding of the history, Chris. I look at that much differently.
Well, there
First
was
of all,
fighting going on.
We had Russia invade another country, a sovereign nation, during.
Guys, JD Vance is smart and he knows how to articulate himself very, very well. When do you think that these news reporters will get tired of him coming on their show and making them look a complete fool? Like, Kristen Welker, you're done. Every time you meet in a room with this guy, you're done. And we don't know which interview came first, but we do know he had all three interviews in one day. Margaret Brennan, I know you were on there tearing up with your eyes halfway open like you always are. Jake Tapper, we already seen you look like a fool. Check out my last video. And you, Kristen, what are you doing? You come in there with these baseless statements and you just talk based off of bias. Let's keep going, guys. This is stuff we already know. Put Trump JD Vance 2024 in the comments right now.
During Obama, we had Russia invade a sovereign nation during Bush's term. We had Russia invade a sovereign nation during the leadership of Kamala Harris. The one 4-year term where Russia did not launch a full-scale invasion against a neighbor was under the leadership of Donald Trump. We also have to remember, just on that point, if Donald Trump had not given Ukraine javelins, the country would not exist as an independent sovereign nation anymore. So the idea that Donald Trump wasn't sufficiently strong on Russia, I think, is belied by the actual history of the period.
Again, there was fighting going on for 4 years during Donald Trump.
But there wasn't a full-scale invasion. I think that's important.
Let me ask you, because there are real concerns about Vladimir Putin invading NATO allies. Under a Trump-Vance administration, can you pledge sitting here today that the U.S. will continue to remain a member of NATO?
Of course, we're going to honor our NATO commitments, but I think it's important, Kristen, that we recognize that NATO is not just a welfare client. It should be a real alliance. And this is a strong difference between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Donald Trump wants NATO to be strong. He wants us to remain in NATO, but he also wants NATO countries to actually carry their share of the defense burden. Under Kamala Harris's leadership, we've actually seen how weak NATO is as a full-scale military alliance. It's effectively the United Kingdom, a couple of other nations, and the United States. NATO's problem is, particularly Germany, has to spend more on security, has to spend more on defense. We can't be the policeman of the world. We want NATO to be an alliance, not just a dependent of the United States.
NATO has been unified in defending Ukraine. Just to be very clear, though, you would stay in NATO. Just a yes?
We would stay in NATO, Kristen, but this is important. You're right. NATO has done, some of the countries have done a lot, but actually some of the countries relative to GDP have done very little in Ukraine, and that's important. And this, again, we're talking to the American people, of course, and I think a very significant difference between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump is Kamala Harris would like to use our tax dollars and our troops to subsidize.
So JD Vance just made a mistake there. He said we are talking to the American people. He is. She isn't. She isn't talking to the American people. She's talking to the people that want to see America fall. The true American people are the people that pay attention to Trump and JD Vance. Why? Because these are the people that are going to be leading this country to greatness, to less expensive groceries, screwing the other countries that screwed us, getting back what's ours, guys. This is what we need in America, and this is why I'm voting red, and I'm not going back. I'm better off dead if I'm not voting red, guys. Let's keep going.
As Europeans not taking care of their own security, Donald Trump wants Europe to step up big time to become a real ally of the United States and not just a dependent.
Senator, let's move on, because you talked about the threat from China. So this week we learned that China...
She always wants to move on when he gives the answer. She never wants to say you're right. She never wants to say you're right. She always says, let's move on. Let's go somewhere else. Whenever he's right, that's what these people do. Let's move on. This is insane.
Was behind a broad hacking campaign targeting the phones of both presidential campaigns, highlighting the threat that China poses to this country. And yet Donald Trump recently called his domestic political opponents, quote, the enemy from within, and said they are more dangerous than Russia and China. Do you believe that people like Adam Schiff and Nancy Pelosi are more dangerous than Russia and China?
Well, I think what Donald Trump said is that those folks pose a greater threat to United States' peace and security because America is strong enough to stand up to any foreign adversary.
Do you agree with him? They pose a larger threat to the United States than Russia and China?
What he said, and I do agree with this, what he said is that the biggest threat we have in our country, it's not a foreign adversary because we can handle these guys. We can handle foreign conflicts. We can handle, look, under Nancy Pelosi's long life in public leadership, the United States has gone from the preeminent industrial power of the world to second next to China. That fundamentally belongs on Nancy Pelosi's shoulders. And if we're going to have a more prosperous country, we've got to recognize our own leadership is why we lost our industrial base to China. Our own leadership is failing to lead this country into peace and prosperity. And of course, Kamala Harris, look, when I look at the biggest threats to America, Kristen, I think the fact that people can't afford groceries, the fact that we can't meet our recruitment goals in the military, the fact that Americans have a wide open southern border, that's a way bigger threat than any foreign threat. And yes, it's caused by broken leadership.
And yet, Senator, as you know, inflation is coming down. Let me ask you about some of what we've heard here.
25% higher, Kristen, than it was when Donald Trump left the Oval Office. Do Americans, and this is an important issue, if Americans feel like inflation is a solved problem, then maybe they should vote for Kamala Harris. If you feel like the price of groceries, if you feel like the price of housing is too high, if you feel like inflation is not over, then Donald Trump is your man.
Right. There's no doubt folks believe that groceries are too high. Just making the point that inflation has come down.
I agree with those
Let
folks.
me ask you about some of what we've heard here in the U.S. this week. Donald Trump's longest-serving chief of staff.
I think she just wants to make statements. This is not a person that are making truthful statements. This is a person that is just willing to speak, 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 no matter what answer you give. You have to be afraid of someone like this because
General
they will say anything to make you look crazy. No matter how many facts you provide, they will say anything to make you look crazy. Guys, let's keep going.
John Kelly said Donald Trump is a fascist. He echoed comments made by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, who also called him a fascist. When two four-star generals who worked so closely with Donald Trump call him a fascist, why shouldn't voters believe them, Senator?
Well, I think that Mark Milley and John Kelly are both disgruntled former employees, and very many of the things that they accuse Donald Trump of, people who were in the room at the time some of those comments were made, they have said explicitly Donald Trump didn't say the things that he was accused of. And look, Donald Trump was already president for 4 years. If he was what John Kelly said he was, then why did Donald Trump deliver peace and prosperity? He didn't arrest his political opponents, as Kamala Harris and her Department of Justice have in fact done.
Hold on, there's no evidence of that. There's no evidence of that, Senator, that Kamala Harris has arrested
Justice
their
has not been
political
going
opponents.
after political opponents.
Senator, there's no evidence of that.
The current Department of Justice, under the leadership of Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, has absolutely been going after the political opponents of the current Democratic Party. I think that's a disgrace, but it's happening.
There's no evidence that the DOJ is going after their political opponents. Donald Trump was indicted by federal grand juries. Let me ask you, though, you said that they're disgruntled employees. Trump praised both Kelly and Milley. In fact, he said Kelly was, quote, one of the best people I've ever worked with. In addition to those two, Trump's national security advisors, two defense secretaries, even his vice president all say he's unfit to be president. Why should the American people hire Donald Trump when the people who worked most closely with him say that he's unfit to serve?
These people that are saying he's most unfit to serve are the same exact people that live during this thriving economy. They're just saying this because they're getting paid more to lie. It's it's not Donald Trump's fault that he had unloyal people around him, but we can't sit there and blame him for it. And I'm not going to sit there and let someone like Kristen Welker blame him for it when you have people in your ear yapping, saying, ask JD Vance this, see his stance on this, see how he feels about this. Not asking him anything good, anything that he could have, just a cool little answer to that makes him shine. Just one. But you ask Kamala Harris questions, and it's what color are your nails? Oh, they're purple today. Like it's just a bunch of BS. When are we gonna stop letting this BS slide, guys? When are we gonna stand up? When are we gonna stand up, guys? Because that's what I really want to see. Let's finish this interview out, guys. I've had enough of Kristen Welker. Catch me on the back end.
People who worked most closely with him, most of them are supporting this ticket. You mentioned one person, two people, a disgruntled ex-employee, Kristen, who Donald Trump fired. He said something nice about him, and then he fired him, and now that person's attacking Donald Trump. But I think this is important because I think the American media has to be honest. Why is it, Kristen, that John Kelly doesn't like Donald Trump? It's not about personality. It's about policy. And I think the American people have the right to know that Donald Trump rejected the John Kelly, the Mark Milley consensus that America should be the policeman of the world. And because of that, these folks hate him. If Donald Trump wanted to start a nuclear war with Russia, I guarantee you that John Kelly and Liz Cheney would be at the front of the line endorsing him. But I think the media misses something really important. This disagreement is not about personalities. This disagreement is because John Kelly didn't like the peace through strength policy of Donald Trump. I do, and I think the American people do.
He was the longest-serving chief of staff, and Donald Trump says he only hires the best people. I got to keep moving, though, because our time is very limited. Former Vice President Mike Pence said, quote, President Trump asked me to put him over my oath to the Constitution. Anyone who puts himself over the Constitution should never be president of the United States. Will your loyalty, Senator, be to the Constitution or to Donald Trump?
Well, of course, my loyalty is to the American people and to the United States Constitution, but I think the best way to accomplish that loyalty.
Okay, guys, that's enough of this. Do you see how she words that question? Is your loyalty to the Constitution or to Donald Trump? Donald Trump is following the Constitution, but you guys are trying to throw a bump at him every way in this road that he travels. Every way in this road that he travels, you guys are trying to throw something to throw spikes out, break his tires down. You guys are trying to make him go out and change tires. And that's how it that's how it's been for him running for president. But there's been a a few loyal politicians that's been in his corner. You know, people switching. People they're going after Candace Owens. They're going after Tulsi Gabbard. They're going after RFK. Guys, this stuff is obvious. It's obvious who should be our president. I need you guys to let me know in the comments who you're voting for. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe if you're new. And as always, let me know what to react to. We're out.